Crowleys Crew, Crowleys Crew, we're our blacksmiths through and through. Crowleys Crew, Crowleys Crew, we're our blacksmiths good and true.
You could say Ambrose Crowley made Winlaton into the town that it is now. Before Ambrose Crowley, in the early 1600s, it would have been just a handful of cottages, farming, a little bit coal mining, wouldn't have been of any importance at all. Ambrose Crowley was an ironmonger who was born in a place called Stourbridge in the Midlands to another Ambrose Crowley who was himself a successful ironmonger in Stourbridge. Young Ambrose served his apprenticeship as a blacksmith, ironmonger, but not long after that he decided to move north and set up a factory in Sunderland.
Now we started in Sunderland, obviously because it was on the sea. In those days, remember, England didn't have any good roads. Remember, 1691, or rather 1685, when he came to Sunderland, transporting goods by road was very, very difficult. So you were transported by sea.
His idea being, if he had access to the sea, he could ship his finished goods down to the huge naval yards down on the south coast, which is where the main source of the contracts were based.
Now in Sunderland he had this works, but he had foreign workers. Now the foreign workers were being persecuted because of their religion. So he looked for another place, an isolated place in the northeast, and he came to Winlaton.
Quite a strange choice, a hilltop, not really beside the sea. On top really he'd have to bring everything up and take everything down, but he did. 1690, 91, he bought some land in Winlaton, he bought some mills in Winlaton Mill.
Now then, to operate a big forge hammer you need power, and in those days, 1690s, it was water power. You've seen big water wheels, you know. Now then, Winlaton Mill expanded into a big factory. Now Winlaton, they had shops like this. These are called shops, blacksmith shops.
He built 3 squares, which would have been just like a horseshoe shape, which would have been houses like this. This is a forge, but there would be a cottage attached to the side of it for families to live in. And there would have been quite a number of these houses laid out in a square. There would have been a gate at the front and a wicket gate for the workers to go in and out. And they would have been controlled by a monitor who would watch them for the starting times and the finishing times. But he built 3 such squares in Winlaton.
He had the contract for the Admiralty, that's the Navy. And at the time, we started the 100 Years' War with France. So they needed millions and millions of nails for the wooden ships. And they were produced, the majority of nails for the Admiralty were produced in Winlaton. This is an example of the nails that were made by the Crowleys Crew. And they would go down to the Admiralty and for the naval ships. There was lots of workshops like this. I think there must have been about 120 of these right across Winlaton, all over, you know. And he produced neck irons, armbands, shackles and chains for the slave trade. Now that's, a lot of people don't know that, but they were made in Winlaton, you know.
He started producing chains, small chains through to eventually huge chains. Some anchor chains would be 3 foot in diameter. They were massive. And he also had a reliability. He himself quoted that in the Great Storm of 1703, where lots of ships were pulled off their anchors, none of his broke.
The workers would be working there, and they would work 80 hours a week. You'd start at 6 in the morning, and you would finish at 8 at night. And if the foreman wanted to work later, you'd have to work. There was a curfew. Curfew means you had to be in your house at 9 o'clock. There was a curfew bell, and that bell would ring at night, and it would ring in the morning for you to start work. You weren't allowed to swear, you weren't allowed anyone drunk, you would be thrown out and you would be dismissed. That was the system they had, you know.
It would have been very hard. However, they would have been very glad to get the employment. It was steady, it was well paid for its time, and they were given houses, and they were given a workshop. He supplied them with the tools, the anvils. They were probably quite happy to abide by these rules and conditions. Some of them were quite strict. There was curfew. It affected their work, their social lives as well. But he was also unique in so much that he provided a social system. He was the precursor of the Industrial Revolution in Winlaton, but he was also the forerunner in social welfare. He set up a church, first of all, in his own premises in Winlaton Hall. Then he eventually, by public subscription, he established the church. That meant that the workforce didn't have to walk to Wrighton every week and back again, because that was the nearest church. He set up a school for the kids, which was again quite unique. In fact, Winlaton became fairly famous throughout the locality because it had a school for children, and again the nickname of Knowledge Hill. And indeed, there's a street just across the way there still called Knowledge Hill, in reference to that. He brought in a pension scheme for his workers. It was a contributory pension scheme, so in a sense it was one of the first superannuation schemes. But he had funeral benefits. If anyone died, the widows would be looked after. A lot of the widows would be find work in his premises, making the Hessian sacks that they would use in their thousands.
There was a health system. If you fell ill, you got paid. If your children fell ill, there was a doctor on site. It would be free medicine. It was I wouldn't say the forerunner of the NHS, but this is where the system came from, you know. Crowley looked after his people, you know.
There were a hard bunch of lads, and they were probably equivalent to the keelmen. They could be quite fit. They actually became known as Crowleys Crew. And in any political meetings, which were held quite often on the town moor, Crowleys Crew were quite often there and would voice their opinions, and could be a little bit fisticuffs and a bit violence. But there's one occasion when, in about 1839, when the Peterloo massacre occurred, feelings were running very high against the government. And I think there'd been a meeting in the town, in which there was quite a few people there, and I think a few voices were raised and concerns. And the local mayor at the time sort of wrote to the bigwigs in London and says, look, you know, there's been 700 guys from Winlaton and they seem a bit of a crew. We're a bit scared of what they might be going to do. Well, after that, there was a bit apprehension in Winlaton, and apparently some guy heard something in Newcastle, and he came galloping to Winlaton and said, they're going to send the militia in against you. Well, that set all the blacksmiths to work. They produced weapons, pike staffs, they produced caltrops, which were 3 spiked balls, which would be thrown down in front of the cavalry to pierce the horses' hooves. We were also known to apparently have 14 small cannon, which they arranged around the sandhill, and they were in preparation for the militia coming to attack them. I think it's been written that fortunately the militia never came, because I think there might have been a bit of a bloodbath, but they were quite prepared to take on the militia for their rights, because it became a very strong centre for the Charteris movement, which was looking for votes for every man and more equality. But Charterism eventually became the basis of the trade union. But yes, they were a hardy crew and much respected.
For countless years the work went on, renowned and famed throughout the land. But all good things must end the sea, and so the smithy's final hand. In 1966 it came, the hammer struck the final blow, the final link, the final chain, no longer does the fire glow. Crowleys Crew, Crowleys Crew, we're all blacksmiths through and through. Crowleys Crew, Crowleys Crew, we're all blacksmiths good and true.